ये तो स्टार्ट करना 5 मिनट से ना अच्छा 8-5 वाली बात 8-5 वाली ऑनलाइन है ना ऑनलाइन स्टार्ट करा हो गया So good morning everyone. Small class sometimes reminds me about those days when there were very few people, right? Maybe you are at the end of your MBA and things like that. Rain is also probably a affecting thing, something that affects. Anyway, we have to do our session as well. So let me start off. Today's session actually is on innovation. As we mentioned at the beginning, there are three very special competency areas for entrepreneurs. One is very basically see an opportunity. So that's what we spoke about last time. Not only seeing an opportunity, also taking that opportunity to the market. The other area is what we are going to talk about today is the ability to innovate. Now, innovation is not invention. We talk about that. Where entrepreneurs are concerned, there are so many inventions, so much of R&D has been done. So you can take that idea into the market. You don't have to do the scientific part. Laboratories, sometimes R&D areas, universities sometimes have done enough of research. So if you go to those areas and find out something, you might take it to the market. You might take it to the market. Some of our own ESRP guys have done that. So going to universities and seeing there's so much of research that has been done. So it's left for someone to take that to the market. That is what innovation is about. It's not invention. Basically, taking something to the market of value. Of value, that's very important. So we are going to talk about that area today. And the other area is to take a moderate risk. That's also a kind of a competency area of entrepreneurs. You have to slightly step out of your comfort zone. That's about all. Try to do something, stretch your abilities a little bit and do something. Go and talk to some people you never spoke to before. Things like that is slightly stepping out of your comfort zone. And that's what we mean by a moderate risk. To stretch your abilities a little bit and see what you can do. So that is the big difference between a small businessman, like someone who has small kade or something like that, and a large businessman. But from continuous stages, he has stretched himself. If you look like Navaloka or some company like that today, where did they start? They started very small, right? Just a boutique. But today, where are they? Where are they? So if you try to understand that abilities, because they took small risks over time and try to stretch themselves to the next level, slightly next level, and so on and so forth. It takes a bit of time. And so many years later, if you look at what Navaloka has done, probably they are now more than 50 years maybe, where they are today, is because of these moderate risks that were taken. It's like that. So these three areas are very important areas, competency areas for entrepreneurs. So we are talking about innovation today. And we are talking about the practical side as well as the theory side as we go on. Now, if you look at our own Sri Lankan situation, people say we are not that very innovative sometimes. We are going to talk about details about that. But in the past, for example, we have evidence, historical evidence, that we have been quite innovative. For example, this diagram that I am showing you is from research that was done. This is the 5th century BC, during the time of the king Pandukabhaya. We started this system of the hydraulic type of system where we had large tanks, and also how we released this water from time to time for farming and things like that. So there was this valving system, actually very interesting valving system. A lot of research has been done by the Institute of Engineers in Sri Lanka as well. 5th century BC. What happens is, here on one side you have the tank, and then you have the channel that takes the water to the fields, but you have to control it. The valving system, 5th century BC, was a very simple device like this. For example, there was a moving part which allowed the water to rise into a column. So therefore, the kinetic energy that came is converted to a potential energy. And therefore, you can have different velocities of the water. This was done naturally. Of course, very often, unfortunately, our own historical documents like the Mahavamsa talks only about kings. So they say Pandukabhaya's time, Pandukabhaya did this. But there would have been engineers. No one is mentioning the engineers and the guys who this kind of thing. Unfortunately, we have lost that, because there are really a lot of research has gone in, sociological research, to find out who these engineers and designers were. So they have found a few people. Like, for example, if you go to Polonnaruwa, you have a statue. Everyone calls that Parakram Bahu statue. But that's not Parakram Bahu. If you go right up to that statue, I have gone right up to that, you'll find that the statue has a Punanula, a kind of a thread that is only worn by Brahmins, right? So we find that in the ancient times, most of the designers and the engineers was from the Brahmin sect, right? And they were the engineers. So even if you look at, so that particular statue is, well, what the archaeologists, what basically the people who have found this out says that is not Parakramabahu, that is Pulasti. Pulasti is actually a designer who was at that time an engineer, the engineers of that time who designed that. And if you go right up to that point and see where he's looking at the Potgul Vihare, basically straight there where all the intelligence was really documented. Even, for example, talking about Sigriya, Kashyapa actually is credited with Sigriya, but there would have been, of course, these people had visions, these kings had visions, but they entrusted the design and things like that to some other set of people. We have lost that. So Senarath Paranivitan actually has found out that the designer for Sigriya was another Brahmin called Maga Brahmin. So actually, they were the acharyas of that time. You know, the acharya. Today PhDs are normally called acharyas, right? But actually, this acharya word is a very interesting word. It comes from a Sanskrit sloka, right? I will tell you what the sloka is, right? It goes like this: Akaro Veda Jnanancha, Chakaro Shastra Kovidan, Rikaro Shilpa Vinyanam, Achari Triyakshura Shangvitam. Akaro Veda Jnananta means the acharyas knew the Vedas, the body of knowledge. Chakaro Shastra Kovidan, they knew the technologies. Rikaro Shilpa Vinyanam, they knew the crafts. So the word acharya means that a person who can have all those three: the knowledge, the crafts, ability for crafts, and also the ability for technology. So probably that was the origins of these people. So where we have lost this actually, for example, we had a very, very powerful civilization, and there were stories that we have even exported high carbon steel swords to the world at that time. You know, a lot of research has been done on that. So, sorry? Brahmins, yes. Of course, the Brahmins were part of the society. There was no divisions as such. They were part of the major society, and they were the engineers of that time. It was a craft area. Engineering was a craft area, and therefore they actually had to. They had because this division of labor was separated among the people, and the division of engineering was actually among the Brahmins, right? So this is very interesting. Sometimes people are they have found another Brahmin actually called Thiya, who actually had done some designs in Anuradhapura, right? So there's a lot of kind of evidence like that. So the thing is, I'm just quoting two people, like, for example, Kumaratunga Munidasa says, of course, he uses a singular verse and says that any country that does not innovate will not rise, very basically. And also, I am also showing a more modern, right? Of course, our hydroelectric power came from a vision of Vimala Surendra, who was an engineer at that time. And even when he presented his plan to the Institute of Engineers at that time, it was run by most of the British guys. They laughed. They said, "How can you get electricity from water?" You know, things like that, right? So anyway, this vision actually was a very powerful vision. So unfortunately, what has happened today actually, in the sense that, why are we saying that Sri Lankans are not innovative? Why don't we carry that gene that was there sometime before? Probably there are so many explanations to this, and sociologists say it is because of the kind of colonization period that came 450 years of the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the British. So they told us what to do. And they governed, and therefore we only followed what they said. And therefore some of our innovation capabilities has been lost. This pattern is there in most of the colonized countries, where we have lost our innovation abilities. So we have only followed rules and regulations, and therefore that. But the economists say something else. Economists say the reason why we have lost our innovation ability is because successive governments have focused on social aspects rather than industry aspects. For example, things like free education, free medicine, and sometimes again free food as well, were sociological ability. They were kind of social developments. So as a result of it, we have a highly educated population, and also we are a healthy population. We don't go hungry as such, right? So as such, but what they have focused less on the industry. So we have educated people, but no industry for them to be absorbed into these industries. So therefore, they go abroad sometimes and things like that. So I think that maybe we have to still see what this area research says about why we are not that innovative. But the fact is that we are not that innovative now. And some of the records that are showing here is showing that this is actually the present situation. I'm not going to read all this. This is actually my presentation slides are notes. So you can actually, they don't have to refer anything else. You can actually refer this. So there are various reasons why we are not very competitive. So sociologists may say sometimes the things like corruption and things like that are preventing people to do innovative things. But more than anything else, there is a measure for this, and that is the Global Innovation Index. So I have uploaded that document for you to carefully see if you want to. The fact is that we are a little behind. We are quite behind in that. And if you look here, we are actually somewhere in 2024, Sri Lanka was ranked 89th out of 139. That's in the back end, right? We are not right in the bottom, but reasonably low score, right? And for some reason or the other, the 2025 report gives a worse that we have slipped down to 93rd. I don't know. There are so many reasons for that. The research has to come out to say why we have slipped from 89 into 93. So these are some of the things that are a little worrying about innovation. There are other things like, for example, the Economic Freedom Index. Now, these are all good for you to support the fact. Now, when we say that people are not innovative, we need some evidence. So this gives you that evidence. For example, the Economic Freedom Index, we are 49th out of 100, right? That is, we have scored 49 out of 100, which is very low. Also, the GDP growth, this actually was projected at 9%, but in 2022, but we really know so many things have come across. Credit ratings, for example, and also something that you might, in terms of logistics, also 2023 World Bank Logistics Performance Index. Sri Lanka is ranked 73rd out of 139. So I think there is a lot of evidence to say that we are not that innovative. So that's a problem. We have to actually find out what that reason is. So if you look also, for example, in terms of competitiveness, which is innovation is a very important thing, we have passed some stages in the sense that this is from the World Competitiveness Analysis. We have passed that initial stage. We are not in the third world. This world, we talk in terms of basic requirements are all there. Institutions are there, schools are there. All those infrastructure is not too bad. All those things are the health and primary education. We have passed that stage. And we went into the second stage, which is normally called the efficiency enhancing stage. We are halfway there. We are halfway there. Some time ago, about 5 years ago or so, more than 5 years, we actually were in what's called the upper middle income level. But we have slowly slipped down to the lower middle income level. So what is this for now? Actually, you have to go to a highly developed state, which is very important for us. There are some factors that are important, and that shows in the third stage. Third stage, we are not there. The innovation and sophistication factors. Business sophistication, the way we do business internationally, right? So many whether we have brands that go internationally, to what extent our institutions have gone in and settled down in various other countries. To that extent, we can work with the others, and that level of sophistication is very important. The third area is definitely innovation. That is the thing. Innovation is not there, as we have shown. So that's a problem for us. I'm looking from the macro perspective first. Very important to understand the macro perspective. Particularly if you are saying that we are not innovative, you need some supportive evidence. So this is the supportive evidence, whole lot of stuff. So we move forward. Of course, these are for you to read. And a little more analysis under the Global Innovation Index it has split into 8 areas, 8 areas really, 7 areas, which talks about various factors, how we are doing on various factors. So for example, if you look at some of the factors where we are the kind of more like the output factors are fairly okay, in the sense that we are ranked 93rd, of course, as I mentioned earlier, out 139. But in terms of ranking, some of the things actually are really ranked better than the others. So this diagram, actually, you have to study that a little carefully. That's why I've uploaded the document. If you are really interested in this, look at it. There are some factors. But if in summary, if you look at some of these factors in terms of innovation ranking, this is something that's important to find out. There are 5 input sub-indexes. That is, for example, institutions, human capital and research, infrastructure, market sophistication, and business sophistication, and some output indexes, which is by the knowledge that we generate in our institutions and technology outputs, creative outputs. While generally there is a lot of, it shows a lot of weaknesses in the input aspects. So that's some area we can, this is at the macro level. So some of these things are mostly governed by governments. But even in private sector, certain organizations, large organizations also have to contribute to this. If you look at some of our large organizations, I always mention large companies like Haley's and John Keells, forget particularly Haley's. If you look, there is a lot of innovation that's going on there. And sometimes it's very interesting to study some of those industries that are, the firms that are really doing innovation in these businesses. But where the government is concerned, more budgets are required for R&D and things like that. So these are, although we are, with what we have, we are doing well. That's what's showing. With whatever we have, people are working, but the input part is low, and that's something that's very important. So there is some weaknesses in the input indexes, but a little better, for example, in the output indexes. So what the governments need to do really is more on R&D, commercialization of, we actually, there are a lot of people innovate things, but they don't take patents and things like that. Sometimes if you look at a developed country, even a lot of kitchen apparatus is being, actually you get patented. There are housewives who have patented products and things like that. In Sri Lanka, some of the biggest things we do sometimes are not patented. So that's another area, because you need brands and things like that, which actually go into other countries. So these are the, giving you a macro perspective is very important to understand the situation. Okay, so now we are talking about the general topic as innovation, and one of the important things to understand is these two concepts of creativity and innovation. Creativity is a mental ability, right? It happens in the mind. People visualize certain things and they don't put it down in paper. In fact, even Stephen Covey, whom I'm quoting here, says that innovation, for example, creativity happens in 3 stages. Of course, he talks about 2 stages. But by really speaking, for example, first it has to happen in the mind. Say, supposing you want to design your house, you want to build a house. Where does it start? It starts in the mind, right? You can visualize something. You see other houses, you see You actually see certain catalogs and things like that, and you suddenly have a vision in your mind. So that's the first stage. That's creativity. And then now it comes a little bit more. Second stage is where you put it down, either as a diagram or sometimes if it's a process, you might do a process chart or something. Next is on paper. Very basically, you document it in some way or the other. And that's not very expensive. You can do that, right? If you have an idea in your mind, you can always document that. You see something, that exercise we gave you when we were doing operations at the beginning to design something was actually a step towards that, right? If you just think about how you visualize that first, and then eventually you put it down on paper. The third stage is what we really call innovation, where you really take it to the market. You put it down, not only the document, but you invest, you find technology, you look for operational feasibility, you look at market feasibility, who are the guys who will buy this, and things like that, what do they want, and finally look at the financial feasibility. So that area is really the area where you turn this idea into a physical thing, something that really tangible. It may be a product, or it may be a service, or it may be even a process. So that sometimes these things are very tangible, like you can see gadgets and things like that, or it can be very transparent, right? You can't see it, invisible. Like for example, a management system. You find a new management system, right? So that is not, unless it leaves at the document stage, but then you have to implement it actually in a situation and check it out and things like that. So that's what really Stephen Covey spoke about. Say, if I quote, read what he said, he says, all things are created twice. I of course mentioned that it created 3 times. All things. Vision is the first creation. For a house, it's called a blueprint. For a life, it's called a mission. For a day, it's called a goal and a plan. For a parent, it's called a belief in an unseen potential of a child. That's all creativity for all. It is the mental creation which eventually precedes the physical and the second creation, which is innovation. Innovation, therefore, is sometimes when we normally talk, a lot of people mistake these 2 words, but we are studying a subject and we have to be very precise about this. So you know what is creativity and what is innovation. Creativity is a mental action, whereas you talk about more like innovation, it is really very physical and you have to do it. So here's another, this is a definition really, which I'm giving you. Innovation is the process, it's a process of creating new ideas, methods, products, services, or solutions that have a positive impact and value. That's very important. The purpose of innovation is that you have to create value. There are some things that you might have a brilliant idea, but it may not be creating value. For example, if you look at this door and say, okay, all traditional doors are rectangular, right? But you say, look, let's have a circular door. Now, that's a good idea, but it's useless. It's not going to add any value to people, right? So that is not classed as innovation. It's only an idea. So you have to now separate just ideas from innovations. And that's very important. So the innovation has to create some value. We'll talk about what value is, and that's very important. It involves the transformation of creative concepts into tangible outcomes that improve efficiency, effectiveness, or address an unmet need, a human need. Okay, so that's why innovation is very important. We have to go on innovating products, services, and also processes, and that is the area we are talking about as innovation. That's very important to understand. So if you want in a very structured type of way, this is, if you look at it, the difference between innovation and creativity. Creativity is the act of creating new ideas. Okay, new ideas. You get together and then you say, okay, we want to do something, and you have an idea. Now you have this assignment of interviewing a a startup entrepreneur, right? So you get into your group and then say, let's see who is the best person. So it's just mental, right? There are so many ideas. So out of these so many ideas, some are possible. And one particular idea might be the most feasible. And then you go ahead and do it. Whereas innovation is, you actually something new. Very basically, the innovation is the introduction of something new and effective in the market, where people are in society in general. So creativity is an imaginative process. It's a part of the mind or collection of people who discuss. Whereas innovation is a productive process. You have to really make it. You have to make it in some way or the other. In the case of creativity, no cash is required. Actually, if you can, early morning, sometimes when you get up, you get ideas. Sometimes you get ideas. I can remember the time I was doing mathematics. I used to try very hard to solve problems and don't solve that problem. But in the morning, I have some idea, Sometimes this is how the brain works. Over time, the brain finds a solution, right? It's almost like what AI is doing now, right? There is a part, natural intelligence is like artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence actually finds a solution in 1 second. But where natural intelligence is, this is a chemical process. Our mind is actually a chemical process. There's so much of liquid and things like that. And also neurons in the mind, and they don't work very fast or sometimes. But you can get an idea. So it's not costly, right? That's no cash is required. Whereas in the case of innovation, definitely there is an investment that's required, and cash is really required. In the case of creativity, there is no risk. You can actually have the most fabulous ideas at no cost, right? There's no problem with that. Whereas, really, in the case of innovation, there is a risk that's present in the sense that whether it will work, what is your investment, what is the return on investment, and things like that. What's the probability that this will work out well? So there is an element of risk. So that's some way of looking at the difference between innovation and creativity. How you can also talk to us, right? When you go on, if you have anything to talk about, please discuss, and we can talk about it. Okay, now the question of value. This is very important to know what value is. When we talk about value, we say innovation has to create value. So I think when we were talking about operations also, we spoke about this thing a little bit. We say there is functional value and emotional value. That's what we spoke about. It must work. Functional value means it must work. Emotional value is it must look good. Say, why are people buying BYDs? Right? If you look at in terms of functional value and emotional value, you can analyze why people buy BYDs and things like that. Okay, so anyway, they are a little more extensive than that. That's why we have 3 types of areas of value when we are innovating. We have to actually create value, and we have to account for that value as well. So first one is we're talking in terms of economic value. Economic value basically is from traditional operation economies of scale. It talks about efficiency, effectiveness, and creating production services, whether it works, whatever it works. Now, if you start a cafeteria and you say, I want to make the cafeteria different from what we have at PIM or something like that, you have an idea what's happening at PIM, right? So you have an idea. If you are a person who wants to start a cafeteria, you have these personal experiences with cafeterias, and then you say, I know what to do, right? It's not giving so much of value sometimes. There is a better way of doing something, right? In terms of economic value, it means time and money, basically that, how much it is and how easy it is to function and things like that. You can reduce it to time and money, okay? That's what really economic value is about. If you talk about a car, for example, you talk about fuel efficiency, the ability of reliability and things like that, reliability, robustness, and things like that. what is the price of spare parts? Is that battery replaceable? Sometimes things like that. Very functional stuff, right? So sometimes if you want to make a car better than the BYD, you have to look at the economic aspects as well and say, I want to do something better in terms of economic thing. That's how the life goes on. Things keep improving. The other one is market value, more like whether there are customers who will buy this, what is the segment that is looking for this thing, they are waiting for this. And if we do that, will we reduce their pains? They have experiencing some pains now, trying to do, like for example, you talk the transport industry, how good is it? The train railways are not very good. So things like that. If you start a railway, private railway, will it be good? Or say, for example, some transport thing. That's how really what Pick Me started, for example, quite different to the other company. They looked at the ability of there's a problem, transport problem is there. Same time, there's an opportunity. There are a lot of smartphones available with people. Everyone has a smartphone, mostly. And also there is a high population of tuk-tuks, right? So therefore, there is a nice opportunity to put it together, right? And then create something that might be very useful. So sometimes you look at things that are there already and try to connect them up, you might get a market. Actually, there's a market value. So you have to look in terms of consumer, the particular segment, what are they experiencing in terms of problems or pains? And if you do something, what will they gain? People will be able to get to office on time. They'll be less stressed out. All those kinds of things are gains, right? So this is something that's, then you talk about the emotional value. I think this emotional value is the thing that precedes everything. What people say, for example, your closest friend, what does he say about something? The information you get about something, how does it look like? For example, if you buy a car, why does a person buy a particular color, like red or something? Why do you want, what's so special about that color? Right? Someone else doesn't like the red, he says, okay, let's buy a white car. So that's that. If you go to understand that part of it, which is very important to really proceed in the shape, how it looks like, dimensions and things like that. Those are all emotional things. And this way, as we said in the operations sessions, probably that is the main thing. Although most of the cars have the same efficiencies and things like that, fuel efficiencies, and they work the same way. But what makes the real difference is how it looks like and what people say and things like that. All the emotional data that you get about something is more important than everything else. So these are three things actually: the economic value, the market value, and the emotional value create, when you put together, you call it the relevance value. That integration of all these three areas is very important to understand. So if you are innovating something, this is really where you get the feasibilities coming in. And so therefore, this is what's important. So if you are innovating, you have to create some kind of value. And the more value you create, you'll be more competitive as well. So this is actually the idea about value and how this goes forward. Okay, so now I think you have been, my colleague would have been talking about value business models and things like that. I think the heart of the business model is the value proposition. Ultimately, what you are giving value to the consumer is created by all the other 8 blocks in the business model. That's the heart of the business model. And here is a device which helps you to create value. It's called the value proposition canvas, not the business canvas, the value proposition canvas, which actually is the heart of the entire thing. So how do you look at that? For example, on one side you have the value, the person who produces the value. the value proposition really and the customer profile, two very important things which connect up. So if you look at a particular segment in the market and you want to innovate, you want to create a new business, you want to create a new product or a service or even a process in an organization, you have to look at who is going to benefit by this, who is going to benefit by this. And that on the right side, you have to understand what's happening. The customer jobs, that means what's happening, what do they want? What do they want? For example, if you look at transport industry, it is the travelers, the consumers who are traveling. So they're very specific segment. That's what we mean by the jobs, right? What do they do? So therefore, then you have to ask two questions. At the moment, what are the problems they face? Now that's referred to as the pains. What are the pains they have in this present consumption of transport or whatever, or even food for that matter? What is the big problem? In other words, normally that's referred to as the pains. Then if you do something, what will they gain? So you need to understand those two. If you are designing this thing, if you are trying to innovate something, this canvas can help you to do that. Then on the left side, you have you are the producer of this value, and you have to know who you are. For example, that's what's shown in that yellow area, talking about what is your functions, what are you doing, and things like that. For example, PIM, if you look at PIM, what are we doing? We are actually sharing knowledge. I would look at it that way. My knowledge and also what I know, I'm sharing with you. So that's very clear. We are not teaching, we are sharing knowledge, right? Very specifically, you have to understand what we are doing, right? Right? Yeah, under the guise of teaching, everything is lost, right? So I hope I'm sharing knowledge, right? Okay. So that's very important. Where PIM is concerned, we are sharing. What a bank does, it actually gives opportunities for people to invest and things like that, to save their, to security for their cash and all that kind of thing. So every organization has this very clearly defined abilities. So then looking at the right side and you look at this customer segment, then you ask, okay, what are your pain relievers and what are your opportunity givers? For example, you talk about pain relievers, and also you are talking about trying to enhance their gains. What are your gain givers? So if you look at give you a very simple example of a remote area like Delhi or Takandi or someplace like that. Generally, you look at the per capita income in some areas like that is very much lower than the Western zone. Okay. So now we look at two organizations, PIM and the bank. Okay, what will the bank do? Same pains and gains are there for both, right? So the bank will say, okay, let's start microfinance. So that's focusing on that segment. Where PIM is concerned, we can't give microfinance. So we will say, we will go and train those guys. We will train some competency training for them. So you see immediately the value proposition is what you propose based on your capabilities and also focusing on the receivers, pains and gains. Basically that's, so if you are making a value proposition, this is how you go ahead and do it to really understand who you are. Don't try to do something that you are not. That's very important. Know who you are and see what you can do to that particular, but you have to find out in that particular area what people are affected by and things like that. So generally this is referred to as the value proposition canvas. So far so good. Are you okay with me? Kind of, right? These are very practical stuff as well, but there is a theoretical framework to understand these complex problems, which are not very complex. When you have a framework, sometimes you can understand that. Right. Right. Okay, now we are actually talking in terms of two other things. We earlier looked at the difference between creativity and innovation, right? Now we are looking at the difference between invention and innovation, right? This is another very key area. And I have two very important examples. If you look at Apple, for example, how it started off. These two guys actually started off, these are their old stages. I will show you a picture of the young stages also later. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Now, who was Steve Wozniak? Wozniak was a techie. He was the guy actually who did the technical part, creating those computers and things there. Steve Jobs was not a technical guy. He saw the market. What is the market he saw? That's a fantastic thing in the sense that he saw a market beyond the normal market that was there at that time. The normal market at that time was for scientists, engineers, businessmen who knew how to write programs and use a computer. But he saw something that other people at that time would have said would have been totally incongruous, totally impossible for people like housewives, for kids, and all those people to use computers. That's beyond the normal segment that they were focusing on at that time. He saw that one day the computer has to go right throughout. In fact, today the computer is in your pocket, right? It's in the smartphone, and then you're using it. See where the thing has gone because of some person's vision, right? So he saw that market, whereas he had to transfer his vision into someone who could create that vision, right? So whereas if you start off, if you look at the famous story about Steve Jobs, which was written, Wozniak didn't see that. Wozniak's whole idea was to create a big computer. That was his whole idea. He didn't see beyond that. So you require two people like this, which are very important. But the fact that what they were doing was essentially very different. One was more like talking about invention, right? Creating something based on someone's ideas, whereas the other person sees the market and the opportunities that they are in the market, which sometimes can be incongruous. Say some time ago, say about not very long ago, say about 100 years ago, aeroplanes didn't fly in the sky. If you ask people what could go in the sky, they say it was gas. You had to fill balloons and things like that and send. There are tons of steel flying in the air. Right? If you told that to a guy at that time, they would have said, that's crazy. That's crazy. But it requires so many people like the Wright brothers and people like that who slowly turn this idea into this dream into a possibility. Same thing, the car, for example, not very long ago, not even 200 years ago. There were horse carriages, right? And if you went and asked a normal person, how could you improve transport? They have to have a better horse, right? A better horse, right? And create a better hybrid of a horse. But if you say that there was something else, which we have a device without a horse, they would have said, utter nonsense, you can't do that, right? But actually, it was possible. So you see the importance of having a vision, the real idea, as well as the ability to do that. That's very important. The horse has not left us so much so that sometimes we say the power of a vehicle is so many horsepower. That word horsepower is still there, right? So the horse has not left the vehicles. So this is very important. So this is very important. So to understand this difference of the inventor and the entrepreneur who is the innovator, probably both are important. Actually, you can't say that one person is more important, because if you don't have a guy who can turn your idea into a reality, then you have a big problem. Same thing when we talk about Ratan Tata's famous Nano. He had this idea that you can create a car for 100,000 Indian rupees. And he went and told his designers, they said, utter nonsense, you can't do that. But then he had the ability to convince them that it's possible to do that. And then the designers went ahead and did it. So you see, this is the importance of the inventor and the innovator. In the case of invention also proceeds from invention. There was one of our own, those days, the ESRP was It was not the ESRP, it was called the ESP, right? The research part was not that great, but the practical part was very much more important at that time. And people were allowed to do it in twos. Two people were allowed to do. So there were these two guys actually who went to I think the Uvallas University. They had done research on a kind of a cereal, a product called kollu. And they went and saw that and eventually turned that into a product which normal people can eat for breakfast called kollu crunch. So did that, and it is in the market as well. So there are so much of research that is done in universities, the invention part, but they were not interested in the innovation part. It was required for an entrepreneur to come and pick up that idea and somehow take it to the market. So there are a lot of ideas like that, which actually go on. Even if you look at our own research is management. But sometimes you have a problem in your organization and you want to solve that problem, you can see the research that was done on something like that and take that idea. I mean, I think you should sometimes spend a little time reading some of our researchers because still they are lying in the library and people only look at it when they want to do their project ultimately, but not to take it to the market, right? So there are so many things, like if you look at some of the entrepreneur development projects that were done, maybe they were never taken to the market, right? So there may be an idea which you can pick up from there. So I think I'm encouraging you to sometimes visit the library and see something that you want when you have some odd time. Go and see something that you want to see, and then don't just know about it. You should do something about it and take it to the market. So this is the difference between invention and innovation. Okay. Any questions? Rainy morning, no? While kind of people are you still feeling sleepy or something like that? Is it better to have been at home or something like that? Okay. Okay. Don't worry, this is sacrifice. You always have to sacrifice something for a gain. You have to invest something to get a return. So therefore, look at it, your Saturday morning thing as an investment, right? And look for the return on investment somehow or the other. And that's a way of looking at some of these things. Always when you have to spend some energy, look at it as an investment. In my case also, it's the same, right? So I could have been peacefully at home and waited, but I like to work and things like that. I like to work. I can't now do physical work, but I can do mental work. So that's something that's important. So we spoke about the difference between invention and innovation. Okay, now there are so many types of innovations. When you're talking about innovation, you should be able to give a label for the type of innovation you're talking about. And there's so much of literature and research done on various types of innovation. Some new words also have come out. These things we will talk in disruptive innovation. So later on, we were somewhere down there, you have also a thing we spoke about later called creative destruction. Creative destruction and disruptive innovation are not the same. So you have to be very careful when using those two words. Destruction and destructive innovation and disruptive innovation are two different things. We'll talk about that in detail for you to know really what it is you are talking about. So you have things called disruptive innovation. I'll be talking about that a little in detail later. Radical innovations, things that were never done before, and sometimes a lot of risk, and then you do something. Incremental innovations, like Kaizen type of changes, where you go little by little and move forward. Social innovations, things you do in society, like evening, say, takeaway dinners and things like that are social innovations. Actually, very few people are cooking at home these days, right? So sometimes you have to cook also, right? Don't lose the art of cooking, right? That's a very important thing. But quite apart from that, there is so much of food available to you Uber and Pick Me and things like that, which you can get down. Those are social innovations. Sometimes even if you look at a mobile phone, it's a social innovation. It gives something which enhances people's work and things like that. Then two words I have highlighted, which I'm going to talk about in detail, is bricolage. Bricolage innovations, actually, I'll come to that. Basically, it's a very, see, people in the village also innovating. They are not doing scientific activity, but they do some nice things. If you go to villages of Sri Lanka, for example, you can see certain things that are done, how people are living and things like that. So this is more like a cultural aspect. Bricolage is a French word. Where I come to that, really speaking, because I'm going to explain that a little more in detail, because people are doing research on bricolage innovations in Sri Lanka. So if you look at the current, even Sri Lanka, our own PIM journal, with the Journal of Sri Lankan Journal of Business, the thing, one of the articles is a research on bricolage, bricolage innovations. I'll explain what that is, because in normal life, people do innovate. People do innovate, and it's not done by engineers or people like that, by normal people. So normal people also innovate. So it has helped a lot sometimes in certain ways. I'll explain some of these things. Sometimes bricolage actually has a French connotation. That's where it came from. Whereas the frugal innovations, more like jugaad. Jugaad is a Hindi word, right? So this is more like a Indian origin, trying to explain how things are done by normal people or by anyone in a certain way through nature sometimes. I will explain some of these experiences, my own experiences in frugal innovations in India. Also, they have reverse innovations. We were talking about reverse engineering and things like that. That is, you can break down something, understand how it works, and try to say, okay, I know how. That's how basically most of the Japanese cars started making cars by stripping down American and British cars and then trying to study how it works and then make some changes, remove non-value-adding parts, add a new part and things like that. You can start innovating by stripping down something. Even in a service, for example, every one of you go to supermarkets. So you have an idea how the supermarket works, right? Because you can see. So you can make a small convenience store at the top of your road with that knowledge. So that's how you got that knowledge, is by trying to understand how something has worked at some time and move forward. Invisible innovations are more like management innovations, a new way of managing and things like that sometimes. Or even AI, for example, can be considered an invisible innovation. You can't see it, but you can use it. Business model innovations, that is really when you start a business for the first time, you start with a very basic model. I think the Ashmayura, you're familiar with that, is normally the startup model. But as you go on, you leave that model in stages. If you look at, I was mentioning Navaloka, probably if they started their first boutique, they would have been of course, they didn't use business model to understand it, but for us, as researchers, we can understand how they started if we use the framework of a business model. That is the use for us. I mean, in order to use a framework to understand is what this business model is. Not that all entrepreneurs don't use business models to start up. They have some idea and it works. But for us to understand how it works, we have to use that framework, right? But if you are going to start a business and you are MBA guys, you will use a business model. I think you can use a business model to start up. There won't be any problem at all. So we have this business model. So actually, if you look at today, if you look at a company like Navaloka, for example, and ask what is their business model, there will be thousands of business models. Every product that they do will have a business model, and so many business models, whereas they started off with a very simple business model. Even if you look at Apple, how they started up, you might be able to use a simple business model to try to explain how these two guys started off the Apple company. But today, if you look at that, every single product and service will have a business model which is quite different. So product innovations, eco-innovations, these are things that are very important. Another framework to look at, oh, by the way, I just tell you an example of a jugaad before we go. See, actually, that picture that you can see up there is generally during the COVID time, people wore masks. But see, when you wear a mask, deaf people can't communicate with you, right? Why? Because what do deaf people do? They don't listen, no, they can't hear. But they look at lip reading, right? They look at how your mouth works, and they are very good at that. Really speaking, that's called lip reading. So there are a whole class of people like that. But what one guy actually in India particularly identified as, you can have a mask, but also give a small screen so that people can see your mouth moving. Right? Very simple thing. Right? Now, last time when we said that's a more serious thing. We talk about smartphone and say, for example, blind people can't use smartphones. Right? But that is a different, it's not a jugaad innovation, it's a kind of scientific innovation. But this one is generally jugaad. I'll give you another example of a jugaad. Is actually when I was part of my PhD work long time ago, 1999 or so, I was part of my PhD work I did in IIM Bangalore. Bangalore is IIM Bangalore, Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. It's a superb place to do research. At that time, it was 1999, we didn't have the web to this extent and all those things, but they had so much on networks. So in the evening, I used to loaf about in Bangalore, and something I used to always drink is lassi. You know lassi, basically, right? So these guys at one time, there was a question, one of these other lecturers at IIM was telling me, there was a problem they couldn't understand is that suddenly, washing machines, the smallest washing machine with a top loader, suddenly there was a massive sale. So people were wondering why people are buying this thing. Did they find out later that a lot of lassi makers were buying this machine to make lassi, right? Because a lot of people drink lassi and you make large quantities, right? And also nice for a mixer, no, where it goes at full speed and all that kind of thing. So, so you see, the washing machine was not made to make lassi, no? But these guys used it for something else, right? Which is actually what's called a jugaad. Jugaad, this word jugaad innovation is normally used, it was Indian origin, very important. That's what you see on the right side. It's documented. In fact, if you can get the case study of how Indian industry, lassi making industry started buying washing machines to make lassi, right? Okay, nothing wrong. Not old washing machines, right? Brand new washing machines. The old washing machine, you can't use, no one will drink that stuff, right? So anyway, it's interesting stuff. There is so many ways of frameworks to try to understand types of innovation. What's shown on the right side is another type of looking at, now normally when you have a thing like that, you refer to that as a typology. A typology is some framework that gives various types based on 2 dimensions. Sometimes the typology might have 3 dimensions as well, depends on how you can. Very difficult to draw 3 dimensions, but you can, like for example, you have technology whether it's existing or new versus market, an existing market and a new market. That's a new segment in a market. So if your product has an existing technology and you try to improve it, you try to innovate within the existing market with the new existing technology, then it's very incremental. That's more like the Kaizen thing, where you start going small changes, more like penetration into the market with small incremental changes. But if you look at the same market, we'll look at the new market with the existing product, right? Then you are finding a new use for that. Like, for example, you're talking about maybe the washing machine thing is actually an existing technology used in a new market to make lassi, right? Okay, so like that, you might, that's normally referred to as architectural innovation. Then you look at the new technologies in existing market, then it's disruptive. Basically, you're talking about a new technology with a market that is already, you already have a market and a product maybe also in that market. You put the second product into that market because you know that market, and then therefore you're actually penetrating in a different way with a new product. A new product with a new technology, new market, new technology is radical. They never understood that before. It's a new thing already. I would say some way the AI is also somewhat radical because people can't still get over it. Universities are having problems with AI. PIM actually, they are wondering how the hell to manage these guys using AI and things like that, right? Still the answers are not there, how to do that. So it's kind of radical. Suddenly you see this AI as a kind of a oppressor, someone who has come and giving you a lot of trouble as well, whereas one other set of people will look at it as a major opportunity and things like that. So actually these frameworks are sometimes important to identify what this particular innovation is about. Is it one of these? So you could, in fact, when you're doing a research or something, you can name it. You can name it as a result, what type of innovation based on these characteristics. So each one of those list disruptive have definitions. If you really want to go, I have gone into some to explain a few about some. You might, there are definitions for every one of those today, because so much of research has been done to really understand what type of innovations there are in this. So let's go a little forward and try to understand some of these types. Now we have this bricolage and jugaad. Why am I talking so much about this? Is because the fact is that not only engineers or entrepreneurs do innovation. Normal people also do innovation, right? Housewives also do innovation, right? Children also do innovation. Sometimes you have to understand that that is a natural behavior of human beings to innovate, right? So about this bricolage, yeah, although they are about the same, really we're talking about the same thing, when doing research or something like that, people are very specific about what they are talking about. So if you are doing a research on bricolage, you must know where it came from. It came actually from a writer called Claude Levi-Strauss. And he wrote a book called The Savage Mind. The Savage Mind in 1962. That is where this word bricolage came, the French word. He was studying savages, basically people in jungles, and how they invented even our own Adivasi guys, Veddas. If you study them, there is a lot of innovation they have done in terms of how they gather honey. Sometimes even the shape of the arrows and the bow and things like that. So there would be a lot of, it's a nice area for research. If you're also interested in sociological stuff, you can try to study. In the case of Levi-Strauss, he studied African and so many other kind of savage, what you call savage. The word savage is not a nice word. Kind of more like people in jungles, that how they innovated things and things like that. Say even beyond that, some researchers have even studied innovation in insects and animals and things like that. right? Because it's a living thing. Now, I myself have studied ants. Ants. You know, ants, you have these insects that come and feed on the ants, feed on the leaves. So there is suddenly you find a group of ants going towards that. So you try to understand why they are doing that. You find that these are small hatchlings which have been put by flies and people, other kind of insects like that. First thing that the ants do is they go and clip their wings. They go and clip their wings, and those fellows can't move anymore. They are stuck on the leaf. And these guys farm those guys because they extrude a kind of a liquid which the ants feed on. So ants do farming, really speaking, right? So actually, sometimes we can learn from nature as well how this is done and how they really look at. You have seen maybe pictures of ants carrying leaves in in processions and things like that. There is a lot of order and no chaos. They don't bang against each other. This is a good lesson for people how in a crowd to manage a crowd. Learn from the ants, right? Or the bees, for example. There are a lot of studies on bees. See, actually, in the case of bees, how they find honey is they have the beehive. So in the morning, bees go all over the show, random. They go random. Then one guy hits a area where there is flowers, where you can then he comes back to the bee cage, beehive, and then he does a dance called the dance, bee dance. He dances in 3 dimensions. He rolls this way, he rolls that way, and he rolls that way, fixed number of times, and that gives the signal to the entire swarm of bees. They do one move, that's called the beeline. They do a beeline to the flowers based on the signal that's given. So actually, sometimes these are things to study, sometimes because these are nature. Nature has evolved and given solutions through nature. So this is what bricolage is about. And sometimes it can be very useful, very natural to really try to understand certain things. You have to really experience that. You must go to a village and live for some time. I don't know whether you can do that at this stage of life now. But I can remember when I was in school, I was in the A level, I got a call from the Canadian government to go and live in Indian villages. So about 6 months, I was living in an Indian village with a lot of other guys who went from Sri Lanka. So we lived in the Indian village, and villages in India are not like the slums. Actually, they're very nice. Actually, the slum in India is a different thing. That's in the borders of the towns. You get people who are what you call slum dwellers. But villagers are not slum dwellers. They manage with what they have, and they are quite clean. They look after themselves, and they have enough of their farm and do things like that. They have a lot of culture. So I think sometimes it's very important. This bricolage thing is a very natural way of course, the jugaad is slightly different. And if you look at, if you want to read about jugaad, the main writer is this guy, Jaideep Prabhu. He wrote a book called The Jugaad Innovations in 2012. You can read about it. So the nature is actually find clever methods of using existing things, broad social and economic inclusivity. The philosophy of two are very important. The bricolage philosophy is really make do with whatever is at hand, seeking opportunity. In the case of jugaad, it is seeking opportunities in adversity. I have given an example of a jugaad thing which is there on the web, right? They have made you can buy that, right? This fridge. It's made out of clay. There is no electricity, right? But it's not for making ice and things like that. But if you have leaves and vegetables and all, if you make this thing is made out of clay and it's nicely packed and things like that, the temperature is about 10 degrees lower than normal. So to keep things like fruits and vegetables and things like that, it's very useful, right? You can buy it. You can. I don't know whether you can It's on the web. If you want, you can hire and get it down, right? But it's expensive when you bring it to Sri Lanka, not worth, right? The whole case of the the vessel, Gurletu and all those things like that, is that it drops the temperature to some extent. Clay is it drops a couple of degrees. So if you want drinking water and things like that, the clay thing is actually a method of cooling a little bit for 5 degrees, cooler than normal thing. That's because it has permeability, and the outer surface of that thing is always wet. So what happens is then it evaporates. When it evaporates, it takes some heat and natural kind of surface. It cools because when it evaporates, it takes some heat from the body of the thing. So actually, these are very interesting things. So a lot of electricity you can save by the fridges. You don't have to put vegetables and all. You can put in this. Right? So this is these are examples, and there are areas of research as well. Right, moving forward. Now there are what we call modes of innovation. It will go into a little bit of detail on this innovation. It's very important to understand because there are different aspects to this. So some of the modes, there are 3 modes that we are talking about. One is improvisation. So find a new solution that's like the jugaad and things like that. In the face of unexpected problems or crisis, it could be sometimes that's normally called improvisation. Anyone can give me an example of how you might do that? Basically, not the jugaad things, but how any one of you has used something in a different way, improvised something else for something else. Anyone? Any example of trying to improvise, try to use something that you have for a different purpose? Any examples? Yeah. I think I have the mic. Just a minute. I think we need to have a little talking also, otherwise.
So I have seen that, what's that called? That cement mixing machine, something used for machine. They are using that same machines to mix that sweet making flowers. The potty mixing machine.
Yes, mixing machine. Yeah,
Which
what
is
is
like
it for?
I have seen one, what is that called? Sweet making factory. They are using that pannivalur kind of things to make that mixture. They are using that same machine.
Yeah. Actually, I also did something like that in the sense that there is this home mixer and we have an old mixer. The old mixer is just lying idle. So I use that to make fertilizers. Kind of various fertilizer, liquid fertilizer for the plants and things like that. Now you can't think of using that in a normal mixer, but well, it's possible. Old equipment particularly, you can use for something else. Some of the things that you get, components that you might get in electronics and things like that, you can use for other purposes. So when you're throwing away something, why do people come and collect that? It's because there are things within that which they can be used. You know, there are so many things that can be used. In an old car also, for example, when you give people strip the car down, take parts, they might not use it as spare parts, but they might use it for something else. Sometimes, so that kind of thing is normally called improvisation, right? There is another kind of innovation called co-creation. That is, you might groups that work together come out with ideas. In the case of even Apple, when we look at Apple, that was co-creation because Jobs alone couldn't have done that. Wozniak alone couldn't have done that. But when they worked together, they created this organization. Generally, most of the organizations has some element of co-creation. So that means you are using other people's ideas as well, a little bit of someone else's idea, and put it together. So that is the purpose of doing group assignments, for example, to find that, try to co-create, try to come out with ideas. Of course, there is There are stages. I think you know about teamwork and things like that. There's a whole area of co-creation which you might say, if you are interested in doing research, you can study Belbin model and co-creation. You know Belbin's model? Have you come across Belbin model in teamwork? Yeah, that comes under OB or something like that. I don't know. Have you come across Belbin's model? Yeah. So if you want to do a research, you must see that innovation with Belbin's model. Now you can just connect up and do a research like that. You know. So that is something that you could do. So the co-creation itself, and the other area that we're looking at, open innovation, that is beyond the organization. For example, where you might, I have examples of this when we go forward, where you might write throughout using electronic networks and things like that, social networks, where you might actually get ideas from other people, and also from the beginning of even incubating an idea to the marketing, the whole stages, all the stages could be built by connecting up with other external bodies, and you move forward. That's normally referred to as open innovation. Not only you, but you're actually connecting up with many organizations to do that. Later on, I'm going to show you that in terms of the Silicon Valley model and how innovation is done in the Silicon Valley based on this open innovation system. Okay. Now, do you have any comments? I mean, anyone wants to say something? Is this subject interesting? Okay. Am I making it interesting? Sometimes. How do you feel about that? Okay. Okay. Right. Are you going to use some of these things? That's a very important thing. The whole purpose of doing an MBA is not only to sit for an exam and get that certificate, but please use this in some way or the other. Sometimes some idea, one idea sometimes in the whole course might alter your entire life, you know. Sometimes it's like that. One idea, just one idea in the entire course might really make. I think you must be receptive to that, basically. Look forward to something like that and wait to get an idea and try to do something about it and move forward. So these are the modes of innovation. Now I'm talking about a little bit more in terms of the difference between disruptive and creative destruction. Disruptive innovation is not creative destruction. It is actually the author who came out with this is Clayton Christensen, right? What he said is that, say, the whole idea is that you don't break through as such, but you may start very small, right? You may start very small, but the whole idea about an entrepreneur who starts small is that and becomes big later is because he penetrated different market levels, consumer levels, certain consumer levels. He moved from one to the other. Now, for example, you look at the Navaloka example. They started with a typical restaurant kind of, you know, rice manufacturer kind of lunch packet kind of level, you know. But today they are not like that. They are quite different. They are very sophisticated organization. Next level that he goes to is woodcraft, okay, wood. So you have to now, the consumer level at the wood is different from the earlier consumer level. So you're penetrating into new consumer levels right throughout, and that is the principle of disruptive innovation. You become a new entrant into different markets. You disrupt yourself into some existing market. Initially, you can't go there because they are big guys sometimes, and who try to do something there, it's very difficult. But you have to penetrate that market in some way or the other. So you find a niche maybe in the market, which is not satisfied, and then you creep into that market, and then you establish yourself. Once you establish yourself, probably by that time you have enough of collateral your investment is higher and things like that. Your knowledge is higher, and also your organization is also more complex. You can now capabilities there to go into another level. So you find that as you go on from very simple to very complex, you have to do a series of penetrations into different levels. That's the idea. And the real mantra, I would say, for an entrepreneur when he starts a business is to think big. Where does he want to go in his life? Think big, start small, think big, start small, and scale fast. That is the principle of this disruptive innovation, right? You have to think big. I don't know, basically, if you look at Apple or some company like that, how they thought where they should go, I think was very clear, right? They want to be the leading, maybe the leading computer manufacturer or something like that. That's very big, but you can't do that now. Yours very small, right? So you start small, think big, start small, but scale fast. This scaling means going into different complex levels of markets, and you should do that as fast as possible, if possible. That is the whole idea. So that is Clayton Christopherson's thing. If I read that a little more in detail, groundbreaking products and services that are convenient, simple, and easy to do, they don't initially have an appeal of the established counterparts. Over time, they undergo improvements and demonstrate their value. Now, last time we were talking about creative destruction as one of the ways of seeing opportunities. The market is in equilibrium, and then you you destruct that thing into bits, right? And then you rise from that with a new product. Example was the digital camera, good example. And what was there before was totally knocked out. The Kodak type of camera was totally taken off the field, right? Because that was an industry. It had an industry. The guy who made the camera, the guy who supplied the reels, the film reel, another set of people, and the laboratories that processed, they were all, which was there, but along came the digital camera and knocked that entire industry out. That is called creative destruction. Very rare, I mean, very often among all the innovations, creative destruction is not that common. It's rare, and you have to have a real different competency to do that. And the person who wrote so much about that was Joseph Schumpeter. Joseph Schumpeter actually spoke about creative destruction as one of the key areas of an entrepreneur's innovative ability to bring out new services, new markets, new products into new markets and things like that. If you read that, there's Joseph Schumpeter is the one who did this, where new innovations replace and make older ones obsolete. A constant cycle of industrial mutation that destroys the old to create the new. So if you want to read a little more details about that, I have given you the references, and then you can actually look at that and move forward as well. Okay. So far, anything? Any questions? Any questions about anything? Assignments and things like that? Right? To break the monotony, right? I think you are okay with the assignments, right? Sorry? Second one is not clear. What? Creative destruction. Sorry? Huh? Can you use the mic?
The due date for the assignment was not.
Okay. Very basic thing, no? You can make a request. Any one of you, get the consensus of all the groups. If you want to change of date or whatever, if you have issues like that, it can't be from one group only. So you have a connection through the group representatives, right? And then once you have some consensus like that, you can write to us, write to me, or write to Mr. Champal, and see whether, but it has to be realistic, and make a request, and then we will consider that. Okay, that has been done earlier, no problem, right? But then the fact is that the group assignment has to be presented, right? And what you have to upload is only the interview guide, the descriptions and things like that. Whatever your interview was, you need to upload it so that we can have a look at that as well. Okay.
Now it has been uploaded.
Sorry?
LMS. It has been now uploaded in the LMS.
It has been altered?
Yeah, 26th
Very good.
June.
Ah, right, that's right. You made a request and it happened, or what? Yeah? You're happy
So the
with
other
that
thing,
then?
sir, the difference between
Sorry?
the difference between invention and innovation
Yes.
is not very clear, sir.
Not
if you can,
clear.
yeah,
Okay.
I mean,
Anyone is clear about that? The difference between invention and innovation? Invention ends up with only a document or a finding. Yeah, or a finding. Right? Sorry? Creativity. Ah, okay. Creativity is before even invention, because you get an idea that you should do something, right? And you have an idea, but then when you put it down on paper, it's more like, say, it may be a research paper or whatever. Then you come to the second level after it's now on paper. So I think invention ends up with a document. Whereas creativity, yeah, the mind. Before writing the document, you have to have creativity. But there is a slight overlap. I wouldn't say
is
that.
it correct to say, sir, that creativity leads to an invention and invention leads to the innovation?
Yeah.
See
That's
that?
right. That's the order. Yeah. Any other questions? Good question. But there is always a little bit of overlap. I would say that it's not exactly on a sharp point where it changes off from one to the other. For example, sometimes you need creativity again later on when you're going to implement it, right? I get an idea about how the best way of implementing it might be also creative. You get the idea? Are you okay with that? Yeah. Okay. Right. Now we are moving forward again. Right. Now here's an example, really what I was talking about, disruptive innovation, and the cases of Apple here. As you can see, this is one of the earliest pictures of Apple. Earlier we showed you the guys when they were old, quite old. But here the young guys are here, right? Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. And what's Wozniak handing over to Steve Jobs? It's a motherboard, right? Why is he handing a motherboard? That's the level of Apple at that time. If you read the story of Apple, how they met is because Wozniak actually had a method of designing motherboards, and he wanted it sold in a shack, in a kind of a store or something, whereas Jobs had a store. So he went to sell these things to Jobs. That's what it started. So Jobs looked at it and he said, this is not enough. People want computers, they don't want motherboards, right? So that's where it all started actually. So if you look at really, you have to consider, if you are doing a analysis on Apple, you have to do it under the level of disruptive innovation. Because really what happened was, this diagram on the right side shows really what had happened. They started off with very basic stuff. I don't know, none of you would have lived in that era of when the computers came even to Sri Lanka, for example. There were minis and micro, then there were no micro, there were minis and big computers with IBM and companies like that. But there were no computers for small guys actually. There were no desktop computers and things like that. For the first time, some computers came in. All of us actually, we were very young guys at that time. I remember I bought a small computer where you had to plug into the television. Televisions were there at that time, right? 1980s or some early 80s. It was called the Sinclair Spectrum, small thing. But you have to know a language. And when you write it, there was no saving also. You have to just write it down what you see on the screen, right? And the language that we were writing on is GW Basic and Fortran. Those are the two languages we used to use. So I think that is, so therefore, for $2,000 I bought a small gadget called a Sinclair Spectrum, and I used to be high fun with that. I mean, but very soon this thing took off, right? So Apple also, when it came in, was first computer was something like that. You know, thing you plug in, and but the major, see, actually what's shown here as disruptive innovation is they start very small, and this is the trajectory, this green line, and these what you get here is how levels of markets, different segments of markets are growing, right? They are growing. So these guys keep penetrating every level by doing some penetrating every level with a small innovation, another small innovation. I think one of their most milestone innovation was the Apple Mac, the Apple Macintosh that came in 1978, I think. Right, 1978, yeah, maybe. And really, 78 or 87, I can't remember. Maybe 78, yeah. So, but so that kind of thing is the typical growth of an entrepreneur. The typical growth of an entrepreneur is that they think big, they target something very large, start small, but scale fast as much as possible, and each penetration into a different level of market requires an innovation, something new. And also you have to understand, in order to go to that level, your organization itself has to be more and more sophisticated. It can't be with the same organization you started. So while you're disrupting, your power to disrupt also has to increase. That is, your ability to break into those markets also should be established in some way or the other. So this is a good example of disruptive innovation. I think this is a very, very human. All of us actually are capable of this. It may not be in production services, even our own lives. You can disrupt into different levels with small innovations. You have to look at this sometimes as a human thing as well. Depends on what you want. You need to first have a big idea. And then you can't jump into that big idea immediately. You have to say, okay, at the next level, what should I be? Now you're doing the MBA, right? So when you finish the MBA, you can't be the same person, right? So you are capable, you have the power to disrupt into a different level. Maybe COO or CEO level may be possible, or some level beyond what you are. And gradually you can keep disrupting like that. It will be a very sad thing if you remain the same after the MBA. Very, very important to understand that all of us actually experience this disruption. You know, sometimes it's very critical, sometimes it's very painful. When you disrupt a certain level, you go into a different culture. For example, the culture we worked as an engineers, for example, is quite different to the culture in a boardroom, right? So when you go for the first time into that level, you find that there's a little bit of a tussle, in the sense that you are a stranger and you are not accepted immediately, although people say that. So you have to find your way. It's not easy. So that's exactly like even a business is like that. As you disrupt levels, you have to face new incumbents at that level, people who are working at that level. So it's somewhat painful, but it is possible. And if you ask these guys who have actually gone into these levels, what did they experience when disrupting? It's another area of study, really speaking. Okay. So now what I want to really go back, sometime when you're doing an MBA, you need to talk about a few other things as well, round up the subject. As human beings, we are innovative. And where did this all start? It's actually in the brain, the way we think. Now I'm talking to you, right? And I know you can understand what I'm saying, right? No problem. Why? What am I doing? I'm using a very primitive instrument, which is the voice. All animals have voice, but I am forming my voice into words and transmitting ideas. And you can understand that idea. Just think about it. Right? So where did this all start? Really speaking, all animals have brains. All animals have brains, right? Otherwise they can't move around, right? But human being, it has an exceptional brain. Although there are 3 levels of brains which all animals have, including human beings, and that's the reptilian brain. That's the basic thing. All of us have that as well, right? Including the simplest animal on earth has also a reptilian brain. That's very basic. That is very useful. If you want to suddenly, if there is an explosion or something, you will run, you won't think. So that's a kind of fight or flight kind of thing is there in us as well, right? When we get scared, we will run. We won't even think about it, we'll run. Right? So that is the reptilian brain. You actually can, all animals react on basically the reptilian brain, right? But then, little higher than that, the evolution of the brain, which some animals have, is actually the emotional part, is what you call the limbic brain. Say even cats and dogs and all those guys also have affection. They can show affection and things like that. So also we have that ability and that emotional part. But what we have beyond all that is what's called the neocortex. Neocortex means new brain. How did that happen is very difficult to understand. We evolved in some way or the other. This is what anthropologists say. We evolved. We are apes. We are a brand of apes, actually, for all practical purposes. Right? So think about it, right? We are apes. But we have evolved in a different way, away from the normal ape, right? In some way or the other. For some reason, because a part of the brain, which is called the neocortex, developed. And that is not there in most, I think almost 100% of the other animals don't have that. In the ability to think about the future. And also try to understand consciousness about that we are, who are we, what are we doing, what am I doing here now? For example, this consciousness is not there in most animals, and that is there. They have elemental part. One day they might also evolve, right? But we have evolved in that area, and it's very, very interesting to know, because that created the ability to use tools, technologies, and things like that came from the neocortex. Of course, some of the apes, like some of the apes, for example, can also make tools. But quite apart from that, our tool making has come now to in a big way. I just want to show you some clips to just evolve this thing, just 2 clips. The first clip I want to show is from this Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 Space Odyssey, where he is trying to give an explanation. Of course, this is a film, how this evolution, the spark took place. His own idea may be true, maybe, I don't know, it's only a hypothesis, that you have this group of hominids. Hominids are apes that are evolving into human beings. They are called hominids, are just foraging in an area, and suddenly some triggering event happens which cannot be explained, creates this neocortex. So I'm just reproducing this part on the film, very short clip where these hominids suddenly experience something, and the use of something beyond themselves, the use of tools and things like that is shown in this. So let's have a look at that. This is part of the film, quite a old film, but it gives you an idea about, it tries to explain how this innovative ability came in some way or the other. So it becomes today where we are today.
This is a live view from the Orion capsule looking back on Earth.
The Artemis 2 crew is moving away from their home planet at about 30,000 kilometers an hour. That's fast enough to cross Canada in less than 10 minutes. For the Canadian on board, the main emotion from the first couple of days has been disbelief.
I really like it up here. I wish I could have got here sooner. It's just such a tremendous place to be. The views are extraordinary. It's really fun to be floating around, and it just makes me feel like a little kid.
Okay, just give you how things have changed over the period. Millions of years ago that started, right? Difficult to understand, but well, we carry the same gene, small difference in the gene still, right? So this is interesting to know, and how we have come there is basically through innovations. Maybe the initial ability is something beyond us to use a tool, for example. And now today we are flying into space, we don't know where we are going, basically, right? What our destiny is, that part of it is still unknown. We can only feel it with our 5 senses. Okay, when AI comes in, that might be the sixth sense that we might use. And therefore, to really understand where we are going and what our purpose is and all that kind of thing like that, it's very philosophical sometimes, difficult to understand. Okay, back to normal in an organization. So how do we foster innovation? How do we foster innovation is through certain spaces. The typical spaces in an organization don't encourage innovation because they are actually very structured, and therefore they are structured to think in a structured way. So therefore, sometimes you have to redesign your spaces for innovation. Sometimes, in some ways, we learn from the past as well. For example, one of the reasons sociologists say that the Europe actually started colonizing countries and become very innovative sometimes, and their wealth in their nations grew in a big way, is because of simple things like, for example, they say the space of the coffee house. The coffee house in Europe, for example, was a space where innovation starts. What happens there is, what happens at the coffee house in the past is that people from different areas, scientists who were there at that time, artists, writers, poets, they all came into that coffee house and they drank coffee, but they started talking with each other. And that was the beginning of innovations in some way, which made them actually, which urged them to go and look for raw materials in other countries to fuel their production processes. This is one of the things. So the idea about the innovation space, even in your organization, if you want to innovate, don't innovate in typical boardrooms and things like that. You need to design some kind of spaces which are very important. And sometimes the more free it is, the more natural it is, might evoke people's neocortices to kind of interact in some way or the other and innovate. So some of these innovation spaces I want to describe as we go on. Say, for example, some of the trends that are there today is that people live longer sometimes, and in organizations you have a kind of a mix of generations. You have even sometimes people who are in the 70s, 80s in organizations sometimes, and you have the youngest people. So these are different generations. Different generations, like the Gen X and the Gen Z and things like the millennials, along with older generations. And as a result of it, there is a pool of ideas that come from different sources, and that kind of so organizations are generally referred to as generation agnostic. That means there is no particular generation that's there, and that is a very important thing for generating ideas. Also, they talk about this what you call biophilic design. That is, the design is more like facing nature. For example, although our brains are in towns today, our bodies are in the jungle. We are most happy for some reason in spaces that are like jungle, natural spaces. So while in organizations itself, sometimes you can design typical spaces like with against the water flowing sometimes and things like that. I mean, how many of you are working in Millennium IT? Anyone from Millennium IT? I think that's a place to visit, because that entire organization, Malabe, right? So was designed by the designer who did that, a very unknown designer called Kurupu, actually. He went to the Silicon Valley to see how the design of these workplaces are. And he found that the whole idea, if you go there, you will find that in the morning, the shape of the building is like a butterfly shape, and it welcomes a rising sun. So the rising sun is a very natural thing. Actually, it energizes us for thinking and particularly for innovation. Also, the sound of flowing water and open spaces and things like that are typically spaces that are today used. If you actually even look at some other spaces like in Apple or Millennium IT and places like that, you will find that the spaces are very natural. They are actually having natural surroundings because it evokes the humanness for innovation as a result of that. So that's called biophilic design, to try to imitate, to try to innovate, to create spaces which are more kind of natural based. Also, yeah, this example is actually, I've taken this out, the typical networking that you get in Silicon Valley is like this, California. And you find so many businesses that are working like that, and this is open innovation. If something happens, they link up with all these institutions in some way or the other, real time, really in terms of trying to get ideas, and also from the time of inception of the ideation to ultimately the market is done totally through connecting up with different units. So this is basically an idea about how virtual clusters really in Silicon Valley is the space for innovation, larger space, which moves forward like that. This is something that we try to design actually for Sri Lankan situation for innovating agro-machinery by SMEs. We worked on this, and our whole idea was that stages of production of agro-machinery might go through these stages like this. First itself, you have to source the idea, then you design, then you make and you supply. So you have certain networks that we have to create, virtual networks of knowledge networks and actor networks. Knowledge networks is for ideas and universities and things like that, where you have research and things like that. And on the other hand, you have people who could do things. So we looked at the agro-machinery development, for example, looking for ideas. We looked connection with international global networks, and also some actor networks, and right throughout this connectivity you can see this is open innovation, and that's how it moves forward. Okay, here's another interesting thing that we tried to work on using PIM as a base. Is what happens is typically you talk about academia, industry, and government. These are all separate at the moment. So it's very difficult to work. So we thought of networking, having spaces here where from time to time people could come in and discuss. And also that is for regular things, but the normal things can be done online. But from time to time when decision making and things are done, it's better not doing online, to be in physically. Because what happens is online you get only audio visual, right? Only audio visual, you can hear and you can see, that's all. But here you need physical also. So therefore, this kind of connection is very important, which leads to typical industry, university, industry, government partnerships, which are very important. Of course, people always talk about public-private, but we are looking in a little beyond that, how we should really move forward. Okay, now what's sort of the innovation values chain is stages. You can look at this very in detail later. Is 3 stages. One is the idea generation stage. Then you have the conversion stage where you try to make it into a plan or a physical item, and then finally diffuse it, send it out. So there are certain levels that you need. In-house, for example, ideas are generated in-house. Then sometimes cross-pollination. Internally, you mix up with the functional areas, and you mix externally as well. Then for conversion, sometimes you need to identify products that might be funded, which might be discarded sometimes, and then you develop it further and you go into the market. So these are stages. What's shown here very basically the questions that you used to ask at every stage, and also what are the KPIs that you might use. So I think this has you have to see this very carefully in some way or the other. Okay, as usual, I end up with a case, and the case actually is a clip, interview. So that's why I specially kept about 25 minutes to show you that clip. It's an interview done basically. Of course, here's another thing. This is actually, I'm giving a snap of our own incubator some time ago. So many people at this stage. This was a batch actually which was before the COVID. The biggest batch we had of ESRPs, right? So anyway, incubator is another help to take off, and PIM also has the incubator. I think Mr. Champal will detail a little more on this, how we really do that. While you're doing the ESRP, if you want to start up, for example, and go forward, for some time, 1 year or 2 years, we can help. That's what's important. Quite different to the ESRP. Parallel to the ESRP, we have mentoring and coaching and things like that, which happens. So this will help you to get into the market. So that's another important thing. Okay, just want about, so we have spoken about so far about types of innovation and things like that. But we have not spoken about what goes into a mind of an innovator. The example we are using is the example of one of the innovations that was done recently, which is really speaking in terms of the Vega car. And the interview that we did was really with a team from PIM guys. And the person we interviewed is Dr. Beshan Kulapala, who was instrumental in designing and also bringing the Vega car into the market. So what we really want to show is two important, if you're trying to understand what he says in the interview and try to put it into a construct, you have to use a framework. So the framework we use to understand his thing is two things, just very important. His own self-efficacy. His own self-efficacy was built up on various behaviors. If you look at the definition of self-efficacy, those are the areas. You look at ability, his own accomplishments, his own experiences, his means, his social network and all that kind of thing, and his own entrepreneurial experience in the past, which leads to certain behaviors. Okay, on one side you have the self-efficacy, which is the mental state And here you have the behaviors, the ability to form partnerships, exploiting contingencies, addressing affordable loss sometimes when you're doing, also using experimentation. So this, I just want you to, it's about 25 minutes, so it'll be just in time for your break to see what an interview is like when you're interviewing an entrepreneur. This guy is actually an intrapreneur, but he's an entrepreneur as well. It was interviewed, you say some time ago, we ran a course actually. Mr. Champal and I ran a course which was necessary for doing before the entrepreneurship course called Leadership and Business Development. So in that course, teams had to interview leaders who are like entrepreneurial and make a video and show the video. That was the exercise. So this particular video is an interview which was done on Beshan Kulapala. The use of why I'm showing it today is one thing is that it brings out his mindset when he's talking about why he innovated, why it was possible to invent a supercar in Sri Lanka, for example, right? Electric supercar, and also the art of interviewing. How when you are interviewing, what you should do, you don't go with a questionnaire, you go with the interview guide. We have actually in that, we have uploaded what your interview guide should be like, and you keep it maybe on paper or on the mobile or even on a computer. You sit and create rapport first with this person, so that is very easy for him to talk. And you can see all that in this interview. Usually the interview is not done by the whole batch. There are some people who took different roles, and the interview is also done by only 2 people. And let's look at it. I will, if we go beyond, I will cut it off, really speaking, and or move forward and have a look at it, because it's a good thing to see. And we see this interview that was done by an MBA group some time ago on Dr. Beshan Kulapala.
Today,